morning, everybody. My name is Litzy. I am an undergraduate student at the University of Arizona studying journalism and political science. This summer, I am doing research on freedom of information, access to environmental information in Mexico, about endangered, extirpated, and extinct species of large mammals in Sonora and Chihuahua. So just for a reminder, the purpose of my study is to study and interpret the laws on access to environmental information in the federal and state spheres in both Sonora and Chihuahua, Mexico. So my methodology is pretty simple, but it's nevertheless daunting. I'm looking at the legal framework, so just looking at which laws apply on access to the environment, and the doctrine, so the legal interpretation by the leading legal scholars in the country on access to environmental information and the environment in general, because it's a really, really broad topic. And then I'm also looking at the jurisprudence, so any court decisions of value that have either established legal precedents or are just important to note when trying to get access to information in Mexico. So in the federal sphere, for freedom of information in general, we are looking at the 1917 Constitution. In particular, there was a 2007 amendment to Article 6 that guarantees the right to information. And then we are also looking at the federal law on transparency and access to information. And this was enacted in 2002. It's fairly recent. It's a little over 10 years old. The government is still trying to work its way to getting the agencies to adapt to it and make sure that they abide by the transparency laws or the clauses found in the law. And then the federal sphere for access to environmental information is separate. This is something we didn't know of when we started doing this research. So we're looking at the federal law of the public administration. This was enacted in 1976. Of course, it was a long time ago. There's been a lot of amendments, a lot of changes to it. And this particular law endows the Secretaría del Medio Ambiente y Recursos Naturales to produce a national system of information about the environment. And they also charged them with evaluating the quality of the environment, and they have to produce biannual reports on the general state of the environment in the country. And then, even more specifically, the general law on ecological equilibrium and protection of the environment, established in 1988, is the law that specifically makes a statute that says that the right to access to environmental information shall be respected and protected by the government. So some of the results in the federal sphere for the right to information was that, of course, this is a constitutional guarantee, the right to information, not access to environmental information. And one of the important things to note is that there is no need to disclose the motives or why you want information when you're making a general request. This is very important because, as you'll see in the next slide, access to environmental information is governed differently. They require that you tell them why you want this information. And they also add this clause that says that if you don't adequately use this information that you obtain from the government, you will be liable and responsible for its misuse. So misuse, it's up to interpretation at this point. And it's a statutory guarantee. It's not a constitutional guarantee, and that's something that's different. So in my discussion, I will speculate as to the differences in policies. So whether there are genuine concerns for conservation and protection of the environment, and in particular for us, we are concerned about endangered species. And there's something else that's worth noting, that the government is probably trying to protect the bureaucracy and the special interests, because otherwise, why would you ask people, why are you requesting information? When you make a general request for information, there is no question about that. So I will also discuss other findings in the state laws. I haven't gotten to those yet. So one of the things that we came up with is, or one of the major questions Mexico, even after looking at this, is why is it that access to environmental information is governed differently in Mexico? Because it would seem that all information would fall under the federal transparency law, and it doesn't. And there are really no other scholars looking at this. No one else has really questioned why there's a difference in this. So my professor and I are really pioneering in this area. And so again, it's questioning whether there's a genuine concern for the environment, whether they're protecting special interests, and the importance of having to disclose these motives, at least for journalists, is that it kind of creates this, not necessarily fear, but having clauses that say you might be liable for misusing this information kind of make people step back and think twice about what they're doing, whether they want to continue investigating whatever it is that they're looking for. And some of the additional claims that I found were, again, there are very few scholars that are critical of Mexico's FOI law. The law is pioneering in a lot of ways, in the sense that anybody in the world can make public information requests to Mexico. There are some exceptions. Only Mexican citizens can make requests about the electoral process, the results of elections, because that makes sense. Only Mexican citizens are allowed to engage in the political process. Again, access to information really equates to power and control and accountability. If you think about the fact that when there are leaders who want to have more control over the people, one of the first things they look to is getting rid of public disclosure and getting rid of letting people, question the government, question what they're doing. And another claim is that laws on access to information that aren't enforced usually are pretty much invisible, because access to information is not as out in the open. If you don't have access to information, you don't really realize that. A good example is laws on public safety. Of course you're going to realize if somebody's breaking into your home and the police doesn't respond. And as opposed to that, whether you get information or not, it's up to you to follow up and appeal the process and make sure that the government is accountable. And it makes it a lot harder for people to do this. And another claim is that issues of access to information, again, are critically important for freedom, for democracy, for public participation, and for civic engagement. So what this means for our studies on jaguars is that this explains why we got the results we got. We got some reports. A lot of the stuff was redacted. A lot of the dates weren't there. A lot of it was just general information that I could find on Google. So it wasn't as helpful. But now we know the law, and we know that we have to articulate our purposes, and maybe then we'll get better results. And really, we're just going to suggest a lot of research in this area. As you can see, we want more studies done for bureaucratic compliance in Mexico, specifically about access to environmental information, because nobody has looked at this. And we want to look at studies of legislative history in the future to see, or to try to understand the logic behind why these two issues are governed separately. Any questions? Okay, so the comparison is between the right to information and the right to access environmental information in one country, just in Mexico. But the literature review, because there's not a lot of literature on Mexico specifically, I have to kind of backtrack and look at freedom of information laws in general. So does that help?
Yeah, maybe you could explain it a bit more.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't think it was because everything was great there, but it's probably
Sure. I mean, it's hard when you're talking about like the law, and it would just be honestly a lot more text. Like if I quoted exactly what they say, and I have to translate what it says because it's all in Spanish. So that's one of the catch-alls where I can't. I don't want to make it text heavy, and I mean I could put more pictures of jaguars, but the laws don't directly relate to that. But thanks. I agree. It's pretty plain. Yeah, to be honest, there's nothing in the literature as well on that. Honestly, the scholars in Mexico haven't really, why is this? So it makes it hard to, not make too many speculations, not be too, they just want to be secretive. They might just want to be concerned about conservation. But there's also the possibility Mexico has been governed with corruption for over 7 decades because of their political practices. So you kind of have to say, yeah, it could be corruption, because just passing one law is not going to equate to all of a sudden we have all this transparency and everybody wants to disclose information. That's just not the case. But that's a good point. I think a lot of it is more like fines, but I think you can be imprisoned for it. So, I mean, that's the thing with a lot of Mexican laws, whether they enforce it or not, is something that's hard to measure. I think, again, nobody else has looked at this, so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.